move and ask unanimous consent to be given permission to talk about the continuing business of Fred Dyson.
Continuing business of Fred Dyson. Without objection, Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you all know, Senator Dyson, I think like everyone here has served with him. Every year at this time, he would read a little thing called A Solitary Life. And I was asked if I would do that again for him this year. And when I'm done with this, I'd like to say one other thing. Dr. James Allen Francis, 1864 to 1928, served as the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Los Angeles. He lived from 1864 to 1928 and served as the pastor from 1914 to 1928. He wrote a book titled The Real Jesus and Other Sermons, from which I read with permission.
Granted.
Here is a man who was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village, and he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then, for 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never owned a home. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family. He never went to college, never put his foot inside a big city, never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never did one of the things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credentials but himself. While still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him, and his friends ran away. One of them denied him, and he was turned over to his enemies. He went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed upon a cross between two thieves, and while he was dying, his executioners gambled for the piece of property he had on the only piece of property he had on earth, and that was his coat. And when he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 long centuries, now 20 long centuries, have come and gone, and today he is the centerpiece of the human race and the leader of the column of progress. I am far within the mark when I say that all the armies that ever marched, all the navies that were ever built, all the parliaments that ever sat, and all the kings that ever reigned put together have not affected the life of man upon this earth as powerfully as has that one solitary life. And thank you, Mr. President. Last year at this time, we also spoke. A spontaneous thing happened on the floor, and it's amazing how many people have seen the tape from the few speeches that were given regarding Good Friday last year. I run into people in odd places and say, boy, I saw that thing you guys did on Good Friday. And they will then recount what an impact it had. Last year, the senator from District N spoke, the senator from Eagle River spoke, the senator from Kenai, and then I spoke actually first. And the thing I wanted to bring up, what I brought up last year, and that is the mechanics of crucifixion, because today is the day that we celebrate or observe, however you would phrase that, the crucifixion of Christ. And crucifixion is an amazing thing. As far as an instrument of execution, it's probably unparalleled for its ability to bring out about long-term excruciating pain. I always thought that you died from asphyxiation. We all kind of know that now, because your arms were nailed to the cross, and because of the way you hung, that you couldn't exhale, and eventually your lungs would fill with fluids because they couldn't expel them. But it's a little more sinister than that. The nails that they put in the feet are just for excruciating pain. That you don't have to hang, because what will happen, and anyone who has stepped on their heel, I always use the example of a Lego in the night. Being a parent, and there were always Legos out there, and you'd walk out in the night and you'd step on your heel on a Lego, and oh my gosh, that would hurt, you know. And then imagine having a huge spike driven through your heels. Okay, you don't have to hang, because what's going to happen is you're going to do whatever it takes to get off that spike for a while. Well, when you do, then you're hanging from your arms, and where the spike goes into the wrists, the Romans figured this out down to the gnat's eyelash about how to cause pain. The spikes went through the wrist at a place where they actually rubbed up against the ulnar nerve. Might be the radial. Senator Olson might know. But at any rate, it would cause excruciating pain in your arms. So what would happen is you're deciding between the pain in your feet and getting a breath. And then, of course, when you get a breath, the pain in your arms are just so much that you have to go back to having the pain in your feet. And the people who were crucified would just go up and down and up and down and up and down. And of course, Christ, he had been flogged, and the flogging that had happened to him, the whip, it wasn't just a whip like we're used to, like the lion tamer's whip or a buggy whip or something like that. It was called a flagrum, and it had lead weights on it and shards of pottery, anything sharp, shells, anything sharp that could just rip the flesh. It is assumed that it's very possible that his spine was even exposed. So the loss of blood and his back was just probably meat exposed. And so going up and down on the cross added the other element of rubbing that huge open wound. Another thing, too, is the dehydration. Because of the loss of blood, he had almost no fluids in him. There was a prediction in earlier Psalms written 1,000 years before his crucifixion about his mouth being like wax and horrible thirst as he sits out there in the sun. So he would go up and down for a while, and the reason they broke the legs of the two people on either side of him was the Sabbath laws were about to take effect because it was Friday. And they couldn't have a body hanging over the weekend because that would violate all their laws, and then the Romans were afraid that the Jews might rebel because of that. So they would go up and actually break the legs of these people so that they could no longer lift themselves up, and they just had to hang on their wrists until they would become asphyxiated. Well, they didn't do that to Christ because he was already dead, probably because of that tremendous flogging that he took. So that's what crucifixion is. And we have to decide some things about that crucifixion. Historically, it's been proven that it happened. There are occasionally there's books, and they're usually published around Easter, that try to refute that Christ ever lived, and that's just nonsense. No serious scholar on ancient history or scriptures would agree with that, and those works are generally based on just conjecture. The other thing that was probably true, again, scholars who are not Christian have looked at this, and they've found that all evidence points to the fact that there was an empty tomb. They're not making the claim that he rose from the dead. They're just saying they're pretty sure history states that there was an empty tomb, and the Jewish authorities had to deal with that, and they dealt with that for years. We see it in the writings of one official to the other about this problem that they have. There's even a thing called the Claudius's, I can't remember the name of it. It's a Roman article of communication. It's a thing that they made out of stone, and it essentially said the crime of stealing bodies, not grave robbing, but the crime of stealing bodies will be punished by death of the worst kind. So there's a lot of history that suggests that this man Christ exists. There's history that suggests, not only suggests, but pretty much proves as best you can with history, that he was in fact crucified, and that he, for some reason, that borrowed tomb that he was put in was empty on Sunday, and it caused serious trouble for the Roman authorities and the Jewish authorities. I also mentioned at that time last year that you have to decide a few things about Christ. Okay, so he's a historical character. As Mr. Alan Francis said, he was an amazing character and probably impacted the course of human history more than any other person had. But there's some other things that we need to figure out about him, and I won't go too much longer. But you can say all these things about what a great man he was and what a prophet he was and what a great teacher he was, and please, if you ever find those words coming out of your mouth as you're entering into a discussion about Christ with one of your Christian friends, you need to know how silly that is. It's silly because he said he was the Son of God, and if you say you're the Son of God, you're either the Son of God or you're a nut, or you're a liar. So if you don't believe he was the Son of God, fine. I mean, that's your business. The fact is, you can only default default to the other two options. He was either a liar or he was crazy, because sane people don't go around telling people they're the Son of God. They might be lying. And so if, in fact, he was the Son of God, make up your mind on that. You got to figure out why he did that. And everything points to the fact that he did that for you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Kelly.